winning phone call for that.
£30,000 cash. Oh my God, I'm going to cry.
Yes, you see, that is absolutely fantastic.
Look at the moon. Oh my God, this is amazing.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, it's the story that never ends. Donorgate. Not only has more evidence of dodginess emerged, but it also turns out Lord Alley lent a Labour MP £1.2 million for a house. Tonight, we'll be looking into the influence the Labour peer seeks.
6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war.
You may remember this interview that I had with Just Stop Oil protester Phoebe Plummer last year, but she is now facing jail time amid sentencing tomorrow. Starmer needed a £20,000 loan of a penthouse for his son's GCSEs, but he's bashing private schools with 20% VAT. Eton is passing it all on to parents. Other schools risk going out of business.
He was fundamentally a racist, but his speech certainly gave a sucker to racists.
Part 2 of the greatest politicians never to have become Prime Minister. I'll be discussing Enoch Powell on State of the Nation's book club with Vernon Bogdaner. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and journalist and Conservative peer, Lord Goodman. As ever, it's a crucial part of the programme. Let me know your views. mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite time of the day, the News Bulletin with Mark White.
Good evening. The latest headlines from the GB News Centre. The Prime Minister is due to address the United Nations this evening as he joins other world leaders in calling for an immediate ceasefire in the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Sir Keir's speech comes on the day the Israeli military targeted and killed another top Hezbollah commander. Mohammed Sarour, a senior leader in the terror group's aerial command, was killed in an airstrike on a building in southern Beirut. Well, these are live pictures looking over the Lebanese capital tonight on a day that's seen fierce cross-border fighting. The US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin has warned the situation is rapidly escalating.
And we now face the risk of an all-out war. Another full-scale war could be devastating for both Israel and Lebanon. So let me be clear. Israel and Lebanon can choose a different path. Despite the sharp escalation in recent days, a diplomatic solution is still viable.
Scotland Yard has issued a call for any potential victims of Mohammed al-Fayed to come forward. 5 women have claimed they were raped by the former Harrods owner, who died last year at the age of 94. A number of others say they were sexually assaulted by him. The current managing director of Harrods, Michael Ward, has apologised and said the business failed colleagues. The family of a teenager who was murdered in Wolverhampton have told a court they are devastated, totally heartbroken and confused. 2 12-year-old boys found guilty of murdering Sean Sisahai in a random machete attack are being sentenced this week. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old, who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November last year. An amber warning has been issued by the Met Office for more heavy rain causing further flooding and travel disruption across large parts of the UK. The alert covers the Midlands and parts of the South West until 6 a.m. on Friday. And tonight, the Environment Agency has issued 40 flood warnings and 113 flood alerts. Parts of Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire, Northamptonshire and North Yorkshire have been listed by the agency as being most at risk. And finally, astronomers have unveiled the most detailed map ever seen of our galaxy. From the violent births of newborn stars to the hidden mysteries of the galactic core, these new images show the Milky Way as you've never seen it before. The map is the culmination of more than 13 years of observations. Wow, just wow. And now, back to Jacob.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. It's the story that won't stop, Donorgate. Yesterday, we discussed the fact that Starmer's dates didn't make sense after he tried to throw his son under the bus by suggesting that Lord Alley's £18 million apartment was used for his son to study for his GCSEs. We also discussed the fact that the apartment was used for Starmer's COVID broadcast when it was decked out to look like his own home, even with pictures of his children in it. However, since then, more developments have emerged. The Guardian reported on the story after having been briefed by Number 10 that it understood the flat was used for the COVID broadcast as a one-off. 37 minutes later, the Guido Fawkes news site, Clever Old Guido, revealed he had also used the one-off apartment for his broadcast tribute to the late Queen Elizabeth II. This use of the apartment does not appear in the Register of Interests, and it's intriguing to try to speculate what was wrong with the Reverend Starmer's own home for these broadcasts. Perhaps, like Ed Miliband, he has 2 kitchens or some other embarrassing luxury. And now it emerges Lord Alley, owner of the apartment that was once allegedly used just once, was also lent to Wes Streeting for another Labour Party happening. Does this poor man, or rich man, ever get to sleep in his own flat? He also lent the Labour MP, Siobhan McDonough, £1.2 million to buy a house for her terminally ill sister. So the real question is, what does Lord Alley want for all of this? The nature of these donations is interesting and distinctly personal. As I've disclosed before, any donation I ever received were for the Conservative Party of my local association. None was for me personally, nor did I take freebies. But Lord Alley's donations are deeply personal and cover apartments, loans for houses, frocks, spectacles, and even a holiday let in New York. The only real explanation is that the Labour Party is seeking to buy a cohort of people over whom he hopes to exert some influence and have some measure of connection. If he just wanted to support the party, he could have donated to the party as a whole or to individual Labour associations. But he chose to use his cash to build close relationships with the most powerful people in the country. As Stephen Glover said brilliantly in today's Daily Mail, he's not distributing freebies to ordinary folk on the Clapham omnibus. So what do we know about him? Well, not only does he not talk to the media, we know he doesn't much like the media. When asked questions at the Labour conference about the scandal, all he said was, "Please don't. This is not very nice." He's a member of the House of Lords. He's a public figure. Not very nice is a bit wet. In 2013, the reticent Lord made a speech calling for a new offence to deal with press intimidation as well as a press regulator. He went on to criticise Blair for his close relationship with the tabloids. But if we learn anything from the Hugh Edwards or Mohammed Fayed stories, it's that our media laws already work in favour of the rich and powerful far too much. We have oppressive libel, privacy and contempt of court laws which stop the truth getting out. And people such as Lord Alley seem to want to crack down even more on the free press, free media. So the question is, will Lord Alley use the undeniable connections and influence he now has over the government to pursue his anti-free speech agenda? Only time will tell. But any movement towards press regulation from this government must be treated as highly suspicious. Let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. Well, I'm joined now by the former political editor of The Sun, Trevor Kavanagh, as well as my most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and the journalist and Conservative peer, Lord Goodman. Trevor, let me come to you first, because over your many decades as a political correspondent, did donors usually want some influence, or did they do it because they were worthy figures distributing largesse without hoping for anything in return?
You're suggesting altruism. The thing is that Lord Alley is a very shrewd businessman. The Labour Party itself may be, the paymasters for that may be the trade unions, but the cabinet itself, the most important decision makers, are bought and paid for by Lord Alley. All the evidence suggests that there's hardly anyone of any status in this cabinet who hasn't benefited from the largesse of his enormous estate, whether it's in New York or in the penthouse flat that he has, or whether he's buying apartments for people or giving them frocks, as you say, and glasses and clothing for their wives. Every one of these things is a personal gift which makes people personally liable to feel grateful to him. And what will he get in return for that?
What difference does it make? Does it make a difference that he gave money, cash, benefits to these individuals? How would he use that influence? How would you expect somebody to use that influence?
Well, I think that they are all now beholden to him. And I think that when you have access like that, he may have paid £1 million into Labour Party coffers over the years, but the influence and the access that he's obtained as a result is priceless. It's beyond price, because that means that he has the ability to say to people who owe him something, even if they only think it's a bit of gratitude, that he's been very kind to them, even though it's very valuable kindness, they owe him something in return, and if he suggests something, they're going to take it very seriously.
Well, they'll at least take his telephone call, so he'll have the opportunity to suggest it, which somebody who donated a similar amount to the Labour Party generally might not be in such a good position to do.
No, and I think that one of the things that worries me, and has worried me since long before the election, is the tetchiness, the thin-skinned nature of Keir Starmer and some of his cabinet. And I think Lord Alley is one of those. He takes offence very easily. He doesn't like the press, and he's proved this in the past when he was Crown prosecutor. He dragged 24 Sun journalists through the courts of the biggest courts, the highest courts in the land, on trumped-up charges of conspiracy to misconduct in public office. Now, the whole point that we've learned over the Harrods affair is that the CPS maintains that it will not prosecute unless it's pretty sure of a conviction. Every single one of those journalists was acquitted. And in the end, the Lord Chief Justice stood up at an appeal hearing and asked the CPS, had they considered the freedom of the press?
And this is what we know is Lord Alley's one political view, that he doesn't like the freedom of the press, and we know that Starmer isn't very keen on it either.
No, and I think that he's made one speech of any significance in the House of Lords in his more than a decade in that office, and that has been about curtailing the freedom of the press. He wants us to be regulated by a state regulator instead of the IPSO system, which is a voluntary and effective process of regulation. And I think that as these stories drip out and are given front-page coverage day after day, week after week, it seems, and possibly month after month, and also coming, as they are, almost certainly from someone very closely involved with this government, with enormous amounts of information, because none of these things will be known to outsiders. It comes from within. He will want to stop that. He will want to gag that press.
Nigel, let me come to you, because if a trade union leader gave £10 million to the Labour Party, of course he could ring up the leader of the Labour Party. But it's a very different professional relationship to somebody who's given you your spectacles, that friendship is a much more direct way of influencing than a professional relationship, isn't it?
Yes, you're right. And I think that the friendship bit is the key here. I'm not sure the spectacles were such a good idea, by the way, because I don't think that MPs of any sort should accept expensive gifts. In the case of Lord Alley, for the last 30 years, he's been very close to senior figures in the Labour Party. It goes back to Tony Blair's time. He was close to Blair. He was close to Angie Hunter, who was Tony Blair's gatekeeper, the kind of their version of Sue Gray, basically. So it's understandable that because these people are his friends, that is where his largesse would go. Then when you nail it down, it depends on which bits we're talking about. If you're talking about Wes Streeting having a fundraiser at his flat, that to me seems perfectly reasonable.
I agree with that.
If you talk about Siobhan McDonough getting a £1.2 million loan to buy a house that her sister Margaret, a former General Secretary of the party, great friend of Lord Alley, was dying of a brain tumour, needed a bathroom and a bedroom downstairs, that to me seems to be perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, even though it's a very large amount of money, I don't disagree with that either.
It's the gifts that are the problem.
And I know one or two people who aren't completely poor. One or two of whom have been generous enough to make donations to my Conservative Association for election campaigns. But not one of them's ever rung me up and said, can we give you a new suit or a pair of glasses? It just seems so odd to have that relationship with your friends.
Which is why I don't think that when it comes down to gifts that they should be accepted. That's the bit I don't understand. I don't mind Keir Starmer taking the football tickets. I don't mind the hospitality. Those are things that are very difficult to try and police, because where do you stop? I think an expensive gift is a different kettle of fish. You're meant to declare them over £300. It may be that either you stop them happening at all, or you reduce that figure to £50.
Well, the media handling of this has been atrocious, hasn't it? That they've allowed this story now to run for a fortnight. Every day there's a new allegation. And you get to the point where something like Wes Streeting having a fundraiser, which in and of itself is perfectly harmless, just adds a little bit of more fuel to the fire.
I think that is looking at it the right way round. And my interest isn't so much in Lord Alley, it's about the Labour politicians declaring the gifts. So the old-fashioned view taken by Enoch Powell, who you're going to be discussing later, was that actually you didn't need all this declaration at all. I'd be quite interested in what you as a sort of old-fashioned constitutionalist thought about that. But if you are going to have these rules, the MPs must declare what they're getting. And the extraordinary thing about this whole business has not been just that Keir Starmer was the top claimer, but that all sorts of details are now coming out which they apparently didn't declare. So the sort of mystery is, to me, how can they have been denouncing our party in opposition in the way they were, but behaving like this? And I think the answer is that they simply think, because they're Labour, that they're morally better than everyone else and entitled to all this stuff, whereas the wicked, bad, evil old Tories are not.
And the declaration by Rachel Reeves, admittedly not from Lord Alley, was that address was office support. That's a very odd way of describing office support.
I'm trying to imagine what Reeves or Starmer would have said if Liz Truss's husband had required a suit for office support.
Let that thought hang in the air, because we've got to move on. But thank you to Trevor and to my panel. In a moment, we'll be discussing this Just Stop Oil protester who is facing prison time at tomorrow's sentencing.
Your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war. Suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Well, the first thing on in my mind when I heard about this is, what has this country come to when we're talking about getting kids as young as 6 years old to be jabbed weekly or however often it is, because they are too fat? Where are the parents in all of this? There's 3 things actually here that are important. Number 1 is we do not know the long-term consequences of these jabs. So if I had a child and I was going to let them have the jab, I would be feeling like I'm treating them like a lab rat, to be quite honest with you, because we don't know the long-term consequences. Secondly, the manufacturers are clear that some of the potential side effects can be very serious. We're talking about potentially pancreatitis, let's get my word out, and also it lists as a potential side effect thyroid cancer. Arguably, it's called the gamble jab, to be honest with you, because of these potential side effects at the moment. And then thirdly, I come back to the parents. Where are the parents in all of this? Because they are the role models. So it really is about parenting, and it's about parenting from being a role model yourself in terms of being slim and healthy, and not expecting a jab to take your place and other people to take your place. If you have children, they are your responsibility. Think before you breed. The other thing you need to remember with this is when you stop taking that jab, it is highly likely that you're going to put all the weight back on. Now, the thought of a child of 6 years of age, starting with that jab, conditioning them mentally to live with that jab, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely not on.
GB News, the People's Channel. The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right, Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back. Well, we were talking about Lord Ali and what he wanted, and the mail mogs have come in. Steve says the Labour strings attached to donations quartet. Rayner, Reeves, Miliband and Starmer on lead fiddle. Very clever. And Linda says Lord Ali wants power and to stifle the press. As we await tomorrow's sentencing of Phoebe Plummer, the young Just Stop Oil activist, let's have a look at what she and I talked about last year.
Jacob, you have 6 children. Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war. Suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
Well, she will be sentenced tomorrow after she was found guilty of criminal damage exceeding £5,000 for throwing soup on Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery. She's been told to prepare for a custodial sentence. However, hundreds of artists, art historians and curators have pleaded for her to be spared jail time. I'm very grateful to be joined now by Just Stop Oil Graham Buss, as well as my panel, the most intellectual panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Lord Goodman. Thank you so much for coming in.
Hello, Jake.
What do you expect to happen tomorrow?
Well, I expect that Phoebe Plummer will get a prison sentence, because that's very much what the judge has said. But don't forget, there was also Anna Holland.
Yes.
She's also going to be sentenced.
But from Just Stop Oil's point of view, obviously not from Phoebe's, does a jail sentence help your campaign?
I do not think that Phoebe or Anna should be going to prison for a non-violent offence. And I think that's true in general. The prisons are massively overcrowded. We should not be sending people to prison for a non-violent offence.
What sanction do you think there should be? Because there clearly should be some sanction for criminal damage.
Well, I think I've said. They accept when they undertake these actions. When we undertake these actions, we allow ourselves, we don't run away. The police are free to arrest us.
Yes.
And we accept that we're going to court in many cases. And we accept that we may well be sentenced. But those sentences should not be prison offences. Non-violent civil resistance in support of a safer, fairer world because of the climate crisis should not be a prisonable offence.
And the damage is not to the picture itself, is it? It was to the frame, and the frame then needed restoration. So that's how they managed to turn soup being thrown on a picture to being £5,000 worth of damage.
That is quite ridiculous, actually, of course. As I expect you probably know, the frame is nothing to do with the painting. It was made 200 years, I think, before the painting was painted. It's not the frames that Van Gogh would have used. So it's entirely ridiculous. This criminal offence, the judge wants them to go to prison, not because he thinks that the frame has been damaged, but because he disagrees with what Just Stop Oil is doing.
I disagree with Just Stop Oil's ambitions, but Paul, isn't the state about to fall into that classic trap, the trap it fell into with the suffragettes? You send people to prison and you make them martyrs, and that actually going to prison is exactly what the supporters of Just Stop Oil benefit from, particularly when you do it to young women.
Well, I don't know what happened, and I don't know what the court will decide, but I'm very unconvinced by the defence mounted by the artists for this particular reason. That the artists, as I understand it, are arguing that lots of people have created art by acting in a disruptive way. They cited the Dadaists at the turn of the 20th century. But for me, it's all a matter of intent. The Dadaists, even if you think they were absurd, were trying to create art. The protester in question was not trying to create art. Nobody's claiming that she did. She was exercising a protest. And creating, arguably, we'll have to see what the judgment says, criminal damage. And if criminal damage was committed, then there's a penalty.
Nigel, what's your thought on this? That the criminal damage of £5,000 for damaging a frame does seem to be very different from going on top of a bridge and stopping a motorway and inconveniencing thousands, tens of thousands of people for a day.
Yes, it does. But I think that in the same way that the M25 sentencing was meant to be a deterrent, the same thing is happening here. I mean, unlike you, I do sympathise with the aims of Just Stop Oil. What I don't sympathise with is the methods that are being used. I mean, I don't think, for instance, the idea that you can get rid of oil by 2030 is realistic. I prefer the net zero 2050. I don't think you can take credit as you do for stopping North Sea oil licences. And I don't see that throwing soup over an oil painting stops oil. So I just don't think the methods are right. I appreciate that you're about civil disobedience, but civil disobedience has consequences, and the consequence in this case should be a jail sentence.
Can I I worked for an oil company. I was principal scientist at Shell. I worked with people up to board level. I saw the complete failure of the oil industry, who knew fully well that we were facing a climate crisis. They knew what was coming, and they lied about it, and they made no changes at all. And they used their power to influence government to get laws that protected them. And that's exactly what we've seen with, for example, the crime sentencing bill and the three recent bills that have just enacted which have made protest illegal.
You see, my worry is that the state makes the classic mistake of overreacting to something that is inconvenient but is not fundamentally serious. And that I agree with you. I think Just Stop Oil is counterproductive. I think it's helping my side of the argument. But that if you imprison young women for extended periods for a relatively minor offence, you boost their support, you make martyrs.
You say it's the state. But it's not a decision of ministers. This will be a decision of the court, if it is the decision.
The court is part of the state. But it's the same mistake made with the suffragettes. In a more extreme way, it's the same mistake made with the Easter Uprising in 1916. You come down like a ton of bricks on people, and then people think, oh, actually, they're martyrs. They're not fundamentally wicked. Phoebe, who we had on this programme, is not a fundamentally wicked person.
Do you think, I'm just thinking aloud, do you think people will really think they're martyrs? Or will the reaction of the average person who's not engaged with the issue think these people are causing an enormous amount of damage and they should be banged up? I'm not saying that's correct.
Depends on
I'm just asking what the reaction of the average person will be.
The truth here is, though, is that your government introduced the laws that is enabling them to be sent to prison. And that's a disgrace.
Well, not criminal damage, actually. Those laws predate the last government. But it all depends on whether they learn from the suffragettes, which may change things a good deal if they do. But I'm not going to tell them how to, because I don't want to help them. Thank you to my panel. In a moment. I'm sorry that Eton will not share any of the pain of the VAT charge with parents such as me. Such a well-endowed institution ought to have been more collegiate. But is Tony Blair? No, Ian Starmer, I'm getting into sausage territory. A terrible hypocrite on all of this.
Hello again and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Very wet overnight for some places with the risk of further flooding. Rain then clears to showers through Friday. Colder but brighter weather arrives from the north. We've already seen that for Scotland through the day, but across northern England, Northern Ireland, wet weather has been persisting all day. That then moves south overnight, merging with some heavy downpours across central England and Wales. And these are the areas that saw flooding earlier in the week, and so an amber warning in force because of the risk of 60 millimetres in just a few hours overnight. Could be some transport disruption first thing because of the effects of that rainfall. But by the morning rush hour, the heaviest downpours will actually be occurring across the south coast, parts of Hampshire into Sussex and Kent, clearing away gradually from the rest of the south. Brighter skies across Wales and northern England by this stage. Northern Ireland, Scotland seeing a mix of sunny spells and showers. And it's a cold start to the day in these areas with temperatures in some places down in the low single figures. The cold air because of northerly winds, and those northerlies extend countrywide through the morning, helping to push away the last of the rain and bringing brighter skies for many and drier weather finally across much of the country. Having said that, there will be further showers, these not as heavy or as prolonged as recent weather, but certainly a mixed afternoon to come. Sunny spells and showers and a cold wind with highs of just 15 Celsius in the south, 10 in the north. Now, Saturday starts off chilly, a touch of frost in places. Bright, though, across the south and the east, and we keep decent spells of sunshine into the afternoon. Western and northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and Wales will see further showers. And by Sunday, after a dry start, unfortunately, we've got more wet and windy weather arriving from the west and the southwest.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. Starmer needed a flat that cost £20,000 to help his son prepare for his GCSEs. But he's planning to whack 20% VAT on parents who seek the best for their own children. This class warfare is leading some schools to close while others are cutting costs. Not so dear old Eton, which, with typical Etonian humility, will just pass the whole cost on to parents like me, even after an inflation-busting annual rise in its fees this September. It can afford to, but others can't. No one can fault Starmer for wanting the best for his son. But is it another example of his hypocrisy? Well, I'm joined now by my panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman. Paul, every parent, it is human nature, wants the best for his or her children. And yet Starmer wants to clobber parents who are doing something not entirely different from what he did in accepting a £20,000 donation for his son's exams.
Well, you've made an ingenious join between two things. I think perfectly.
Well, I've made the join.
I think perfectly fairly.
But Mailmogs came in saying this. That's why I've made this join. It's viewer-led.
The Mailmogs are no less ingenious than you are, Jacob. But I think you'd have thought of it anyway. Doesn't mean I disagree. Of course, they shouldn't be pursuing this vendetta against private schools. It does show a very big difference in the ethos of this government. I think in New Labour in 1997, who would have gone nowhere near it. As for Starmer's kid, I mean, look, I just feel we've not got to the bottom of the whole story about Keir Starmer, Labour and Lord Ali, which we were discussing earlier. So for the moment, I feel I want to suspend, not exactly judgment on all that, but simply to say that we don't as yet know all the facts about what Labour have been up to with Lord Ali in terms of declarations.
But for once, I'm trusting Keir Starmer. I mean, I may be wrong too, because he's saying he took the flat for his son's GCSE. So let's just assume that's true, even if it turns out it's not. He's still doing something that he wants to stop other people doing.
Well, all right. I mean, you've now made your join on top of an assumption.
All right, let's be nice.
It gets more complicated. Well, first of all, I don't think that they're comparable. That when it comes down to taking Lord Ali's flat, I'm more disturbed about the fact he made a broadcast from there urging people to work from home during lockdown when he was making that broadcast from somebody else's home. It seemed to be ridiculous to me. But when it comes down to this, don't compare what he did for his son and what is a government policy to do with raising extra money for state schools by charging VAT on private schools.
Why not compare what somebody does for his own son and what he wants to stop other parents doing for their children?
Because it's not comparable.
The two relate.
No, it's not comparable. The only common denominator here is son and schooling.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is
he
no
wants
other common
the
denominator
best for his son.
Yes, absolutely.
But he's going to make it more expensive for parents to get the best for their sons.
Yeah, but if you take that particular policy...
Who aren't going to get £20,000 from Lord Ali to pay the difference.
This is true, but the question here is whether the taxpayer should be subsidising somebody else's choice.
It's not subsidising.
No, it is subsidising.
No, it's not. Not charging tax is not a subsidy.
It is when that money would have to come from somewhere else.
Is your £12,500 tax-free allowance a subsidy?
Yes, well, if for instance...
Is the £90,000 before you register VAT a subsidy?
It is, if that money has to come from somewhere else, based on the taxpayer,
No, the amount that you do not tax is not a subsidy.
The bedroom tax any second now on this one, no. I mean, the point I'm making is there is £1.5 billion that comes from this, that's the estimate. That money is going to be spent on 6,500 state school teachers.
That's the Labour Party's estimate. It's widely thought it will actually cost them money.
It's the Institute for Fiscal Studies estimate.
But it's widely thought it will cost them money because of more parents using the state system, and already we're seeing private schools going out of business.
Well, I mean, the facts behind that are that private school fees have gone up 55% in real terms in the last 20 years.
Yes, I know this very well. I've got 6 children in private schools.
There you go. But the percentage of parents who still send their children to private schools hasn't changed. It's still stayed around 7% during that 20 years.
20% in one time is a pretty big hit. Anyway, Elon Musk has hit back after the Reverend Starmer withheld an invitation to the International Investment Summit due to the comments he made about the Southport riots over the summer. In typical Musk fashion, he posted on Twitter, "I don't think anyone should go to the United Kingdom when they're releasing convicted paedophiles." Well, back to my channel. It's pretty wet to disinvite a leading international businessman, isn't it? And it was bound to get this sort of a response.
Well, yes, but I mean, when it comes down to Elon Musk, I think that he's become an incredibly controversial figure. He's certainly put out some bizarre tweets on what he likes to now call X, and the way that Twitter is now operating, there's a load of question marks over it. So I don't think it's unreasonable not to actually invite him.
It's one thing not to invite him, it's another to disinvite.
I think disinvite at least shows a level of disapproval, whereas not inviting could just be forgetfulness.
This is all the wrong way round, isn't it? I mean, first of all, we all ought to make a declaration of interest. We're all on Twitter. As far as I know.
Or X, as we were meant to call it.
As we should now call it. I think this is all the wrong way round. Instead of disinviting him or not inviting him or whatever, given that, the government disapproves of what he does on Twitter, I do not understand, perhaps someone can explain it, why Twitter or X is not treated in the same way as a publication whereby if you libel someone on it, you get sued.
And Facebook and Instagram and all the other.
It seems to be all wrong about face, right? Rather than not inviting him, just subject his platform to the rules that you would apply to any other publication. And this nonsense that it's a platform and not a publisher has just been exposed long ago when before he took ownership of it, Trump was kicked off for a while.
I don't particularly disagree with that as a general principle, though I'd like our libel laws fundamentally changed. But that if it's published in the US, how do you sue them from the UK?
It's not just suing them. If it's somebody in the UK...
You can sue the individual.
On Twitter, yes.
If I put something on Twitter that's libelous, I can be sued.
Absolutely. And this happens all the time under a sort of massive anonymous accounts, and sometimes not. People somehow seem to think that there's a difference between an X and a tweet and something that you would write in a newspaper, as though it's a sort of form of thought. I mean, it isn't. It's a public statement.
Nigel, hasn't the government just once again given Elon Musk even more publicity? More people will now be interested in what he's got to say, and he said something disobliging about government policy on prison releases, letting out paedophiles.
Well, I mean, you're suggesting maybe they're making him into a martyr or something.
Not going that far.
I think it's right that he shouldn't come. I mean, taking Paul's point, I think you're absolutely right that we've been trying very hard to regulate platforms like Twitter or X, and the difficulty is we can't do it because they're all offshore. So it's not quite like a publication, unfortunately. We can only do as Jacob pointed out, you can actually prosecute somebody if they put the wrong tweet up in this country, as we saw during the riots when somebody put the wrong tweet up there and went to jail.
Of course, but that's no difference to what would happen with a publication.
Exactly.
You can't sue someone for writing something in an American paper if they're an American.
Well, Bill Clinton tried this at one point for very small numbers of copies being published in the UK, and he tried the UK libel laws. There has been a history of UK libel tourism.
So I don't think we can do it the other way round.
You can't do it the other way round. Yep. And I would have thought you'd want to do the opposite, actually, that instead of making Twitter as liable as newspapers are, you should make newspapers as liable as Twitter. You should lessen the libel laws, which allowed people like Fayed to cover everything up. We want more freedom of the press, not less.
Well, you want a parity.
And I agree with parity,
That's the first thing. And there's a difference between freedom of expression and just putting something on Twitter that's completely untrue and there being no legal recourse. So I don't agree with that.
But that's what people don't understand about those platforms, that they think they're having a chat with a friend, and they're not. They're publishing.
I think Jacob he's conflating two things. One is Fayed or Jimmy Savile, whatever, and then there's someone libelling someone on Twitter. It's not at all the same thing.
Well, our libel laws make it extremely difficult to say things about people that are true.
Well, then you've got to have the right libel.
Which is the problem. When we don't have the right libel laws, that's the starting point. The problem is the libel laws, not the regulation of Twitter.
Well, you want to be able to ensure, whatever the libels are, that you can sue someone who's committing a libel.
As long as, in America, you can do it only if there's malice involved for a public figure. I think that's perfectly reasonable. All right. Well, we're going to move on. Musk is no doubt capable of fighting his own battles, but thank you very much to my panel. We're going to have an amazing interview coming up next that I had for our book club with Sir Vernon Bogner about his book Making the Weather, and we'll be talking about Enoch Powell and his extraordinary influence on British politics.
This is GB News. Britain's news channel.
Earlier this week, Olympic swimmer Adam Peaty finally proposed to his girlfriend, because I've been waiting for this, the daughter of Gordon Ramsay, with a gorgeous yellow diamond ring.
Yeah, so the demand for coloured diamonds in the last 10 years has soared by, guess how much, 77% between 2010 and 2019. Joining us now to tell us more about some of the hottest trends in the diamond world is dealer to the stars, Neil Dutson. Good morning, Neil. Morning, and I've got one of your exemplary examples. Look at this bad boy.
So that's a very rare Muso Colombian emerald. And it's alpine green translucent, so it's a really stunning
See if we get a close-up.
So, yeah, so pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive.
Can I be very crude and ask how much this is worth?
So value is £200,000.
How much, sorry?
£200,000. Now, the reason is its rarity. It's minor oiling. It's very, very, very pretty. The two diamonds on the side are D-colour, flawless diamonds, just to accentuate the setting.
Neil, how did you get into diamonds?
I studied diamonds in Antwerp. So Antwerp used to be the diamond capital of the world, really. Yeah. 85% of the world's diamonds go through Antwerp, or used to. And now Dubai has taken over. And yeah, I just went to a school there. I learnt about diamonds, and I just didn't want to be seen off in the future.
Neil, I'm very concerned I'm going to drop 200 grand's worth of diamonds into my cup of tea, so can I give that back to you?
Absolutely.
But I can hold one if you like.
Oh, well, I've got
Neil.
a lovely one here.
Thank you.
So this is a fancy vivid yellow. It's 8 carats.
This is my dream ring, just so you know, for this hand. This would be
is it big
amazing.
enough?
So what would I call this? A yellow?
So that's a natural fancy vivid yellow diamond. Value £300,000. So,
it fits
depends
like
where
a
you're
glove.
buying it from.
It fits like a glove, Neil.
Oh.
Maybe it's a sign. It's meant to be mine.
Definitely a sign, yeah.
GB News, the People's Channel.
The Britain I grew up was the most peaceful, gentle society that has ever existed. That has been destroyed.
Opinion polls show immigration is the #1 concern to the British public.
Are you proud to be British?
Yeah, I'm ever so proud.
My name is Stephen Edgington, and in this documentary, I want to find out how Britain became a nation of immigrants. Immigration, the truth, available at gbnews.com.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And now it's time for State of the Nation's Book Club. Today, during the State of the Nation Book Club, we return to the esteemed Sir Vernon Bogdan's book, Making the Weather, in which he discussed 6 politicians who shaped post-war Britain. Enoch Powell was a professor of classics, a polyglot and British Army brigadier, before becoming a Conservative and then Ulster Unionist Member of Parliament. However, his career was marred by allegations of racism after the infamous Rivers of Blood speech, which saw him dismissed from Ted Heath's shadow cabinet. Like all of the politicians in this series, Powell was never Prime Minister. So I began by asking Professor Sir Vernon Bogdan about the way he exercised influence outside of government.
I was a cabinet minister for only 15 months, so we don't remember him because of any particular legislative achievements, but because of what he did outside Parliament in his speeches. The speech he's most remembered for, perhaps, is the one rather inaccurately called the Rivers of Blood speech, in which he warned about the dangers of uncontrolled immigration. But I think that really had a negative effect because it prevented people discussing immigration rationally. If they did, they were accused of being racists. I think his deeper influence is something else, that he proclaimed the importance of the sovereignty of Parliament and said the powers of Parliament couldn't be shared. They couldn't be shared upwards with the European community, as the European Union then was. They couldn't be shared with Brussels, but they couldn't be shared downwards either with devolution. And shortly before he died in 1998, the Blair government was elected in 1997, and he said sadly to his wife, they have voted to break up the United Kingdom because he didn't believe there was a middle way between the unitary state and parliamentary sovereignty and separation. There was no middle way like devolution or federalism. Now, whether he was right on that, we don't yet know. The jury is still out. It's possible he was. It's also possible that he was wrong. But this was his main influence. He was, let me underline, the first real Brexiteer.
Indeed, and he saw the logic. Somebody once said of Enoch Powell, the problem with him was that he took his train of thought so far that he always ran into the buffers. Do you think that's fair of him, or that actually, unlike Nigel Farage, who you said was fundamentally a populist, Enoch Powell was fundamentally an academic, and therefore he always went through the details of his argument?
Well, I think Nigel Farage also tended to use logic, though that was perhaps sometimes obscured by his rhetoric. But I think it's a fair point that if you use logic, you're unlikely to get to the very top in politics. The great leaders, even Margaret Thatcher, tended to be much more ambiguous, and Margaret Thatcher was much more cautious and ambiguous than perhaps we remember her as being. Of course, Tony Blair's another example. You have to smooth over edges because you have to run a team with very different views, and part of the skill of politics is finding formulae which unite people of different views. And this, incidentally, is going to be Keir Starmer's problem in government, and we'll see how good he is at doing that. So Enoch Powell's obsessive logic prevented him, I think, from reaching very high office. And indeed, he couldn't get on with colleagues. It's another weakness he had. He couldn't bear Harold Macmillan. And the first occasion I met him, he once said I couldn't stand the sight of him, which is very unusual for a politician, because what politicians usually say if they don't like someone is, he has many great qualities, but Enoch Powell didn't do that. And when he saw that I looked rather shocked at this, he said with a smile, and I'm sure he felt exactly the same way about me, which of course he did. He couldn't get on with Edward Heath. He couldn't.
Very few people could.
That's a fair point, yes. He didn't really get on that well with Margaret Thatcher, who he thought compromised too much. And he was a habitual resigner, and that doesn't really help you much in politics.
One of the criticisms that could be made of what is commonly called, and let's accept as the term, the rivers of blood speech, is it wasn't academic enough, that it had a number of hearsay anecdotes that undermined it, and as you were saying, made control of immigration harder because it was so alienating.
That's absolutely right. There were a number of rather distasteful anecdotes on supposedly bad behaviour by people of colour, and he was generalising from that. And that, of course, is totally illogical. You can't say because one person of colour behaves badly, therefore all people of colour behave badly, any more than you can say because one white person behaves badly, all white people behave badly. And there was an odd mistake for an academic, a former professor of Greek, to have made, because what is called the rivers of blood speech is really a quotation about, I foresee the Tiber flowing with blood. And that was made not by the Roman, but it was made by a Greek. And the hero of Virgil's Aeneid is Aeneas, who's an immigrant from Troy and has fled his homeland to intermarry in Rome. So it didn't really make the point that he wanted to make. It's a very odd mistake for an academic to have committed.
Well, I met him once, and he said to me that had he not translated Virgil and had left it in Latin, nobody would have noticed and he'd got away with it. I wasn't really convinced by that, because the rest of the speech was so extraordinarily overstated.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I think it was a great mistake. I wonder if he appreciated that towards the end of his life. It made him a pariah in liberal circles. And I don't think fundamentally he was a racist. It's fair to say that when he'd been in India in the war, he refused to go to a club which did not admit Indians. He spoke in Urdu, which he'd learnt, to his Indian constituents. And in the 1930s, he'd helped a Jewish professor from Germany escape to Britain. So I don't think he was fundamentally a racist, but his speech certainly gave succour to racists and led to abuse and sometimes physical violence against non-white people after it.
So interestingly, the first big thing that he tried to do he damaged his own cause. But the second big thing that he did, the sovereignty issue, which he comes to surprisingly late, he doesn't see the sovereignty issue about Europe immediately. Actually, the arguments he made were the arguments that were made in 2016 in the referendum about who governs.
Absolutely. And whether we had control of our taxation, our laws and our courts and so on. These were all arguments used in the 2016 Brexit referendum, as well, of course, as the argument about taking control of immigration, which is rather ironic because immigration now is over twice as high as it was when we were in the European Union. And Enoch Powell also had an electoral effect because of the Brexit argument, because in the February 1974 election, he advised people to vote Labour, not Conservative, because the Labour Party then was offering a referendum on Europe. So it gave people the chance to leave Europe if they wanted. Now, they didn't take that chance. In 1975, the referendum was 2-1 for staying in. And I think without Enoch Powell's intervention, Edward Heath would have got back in 1974. I think Enoch Powell put him out.
But you also think that Edward Heath would not have won in 1970 without Enoch Powell. So he becomes very much the power behind the throne, supporting and then withdrawing support from a Prime Minister who he held in pretty low regard.
That's absolutely right. And all this is a sign of the beginning of party fragmentation, the weakening of party ties, in particular class ties. Powell found another issue, or two other issues really, immigration and Europe, which really cut across class lines. And of course that has increased since his time. It was a harbinger of what was to come.
Do you see him as the godfather of Brexit, or perhaps even effectively the godfather of Nigel Farage?
Yes, I do. I think that's absolutely right. He is the godfather of Brexit.
Vernon, thank you very much indeed. That was Vernon Bogdaner, the author of Making the Weather. Next, it's Patrick Christys. Patrick, what is on your programme this evening?
Yeah, I'm really excited for tonight's show, Jacob. I've put all of Labour's Donorgate and corruption allegations in one place for us, so I'll be revealing all of that. Labour's non-dom nightmare as well. They said the non-doms will pay for everything. Now, shock horror, it turns out they'll pay for nothing. So who else pays? Well, it's us, isn't it? Civilians, they could just be called up to the army. Would you fight for Keir Starmer's Britain? And I speak to a couple who got fined £3,000 because an illegal migrant snuck into their van and came across the channel.
Oh, as always, that'll be absolutely fascinating. What a brilliant programme you've got coming up. That's coming after the weather. I'll be back on Monday at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. That's been State of the Nation. Tomorrow, I'm more interested in the state of the weather at Lords rather than in Somerset, where England will be playing Australia. I'll be there. I hope the sun shines.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. Very wet overnight for some places with the risk of further flooding. Rain then clears to showers through Friday. Colder but brighter weather arrives from the north. We've already seen that for Scotland through the day, but across northern England, Northern Ireland, wet weather has been persisting all day. That then moves south overnight, merging with some heavy downpours across central England and Wales. And these are the areas that saw flooding earlier in the week, and so an amber warning in force because of the risk of 60 millimetres in just a few hours overnight. Could be some transport disruption first thing because of the effects of that rainfall. But by the morning rush hour, the heaviest downpours will actually be occurring across the south coast, parts of Hampshire into Sussex and Kent, clearing away gradually from the rest of the south. Brighter skies across Wales and northern England by this stage. Northern Ireland, Scotland seeing a mix of sunny spells and showers, and it's a cold start to the day in these areas with temperatures in some places down in the low single figures. The cold air because of northerly winds, and those northerlies extend countrywide through the morning, helping to push away the last of the rain and bringing brighter skies for many and drier weather finally across much of the country. Having said that, there will be further showers, these not as heavy or as prolonged as recent weather, but certainly a mixed afternoon to come. Sunny spells and showers and a cold wind with highs of just 15 Celsius in the south, 10 in the north. Now, Saturday starts off chilly, a touch of frost in places. Bright, though, across the south and the east, and we keep decent spells of sunshine into the afternoon. Western and northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England and Wales will see further showers. And by Sunday, after a dry start, unfortunately, we've got more wet and windy weather arriving from the west and the southwest.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
There's an incredible £36,000 to be won in the Great British Giveaway. That's like having an extra £3,000 each month to play with. And because it's totally tax-free, you get to keep every penny and spend it however you like. We could be paying for your entire year until 2025. How amazing would that be? For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB08, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dewbs Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys. Tonight,
I wanted somewhere safe and quiet for my son to do his GCSE preparation. I needed it to be secure because of the situation we were in.
what kind of man throws his own child under the bus? And
getting jabbed, wearing masks, and working from home if we can really will help prevent infections and help prevent the NHS being overwhelmed.
Will Starmer have to resign over the COVID video and donor scandal? Plus,
we want to bear down properly on the non-dom tax status.
Closing the tax loopholes that are currently left there by the Conservatives in their non-doms arrangements.
Labour have committed to getting rid of the non-dom tax status.
Are Labour economically illiterate? They said that non-doms would fund everything. Now it emerges their tax grab will raise no money. And there are calls for civilians to be drafted into the army. Would you fight for Starmer's Britain? Also, Harry and Meghan professionally separate as their brand turns toxic. Meanwhile, just when you thought that the Labour Party couldn't get any worse,
Play